In the quiet folds of the Arkansas hills, where fog clung to the trees like secrets and the dirt roads curled like old ribbons, lived a woman people both loved and feared, Miss Eliza Wren. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't even properly trained, not by any book. But her hands knew the rhythm of life, the way a baby turned, the sound of a heartbeat deep inside a mother's belly. She could feel them as if they whispered directly to her. Farmers and miners' wives came from miles away to her cabin by Willow Creek. Some rode wagons through storms. Others walked for hours with pain tightening around their bellies. And almost always, when they left, they carried new life in their arms, smiling, crying, blessed. But by 1896, the whispers had changed. They said Eliza's herbs had turned dark, her hands cold, that more babies went into her cabin than came out. They said the midwife who once promised life had begun leaving only graves behind. Sarah Carter was only 22, but life had aged her eyes. She and her husband, Benjamin, lived on a small patch of farmland that never yielded much. She'd lost 3 babies already, one before it ever took breath, 2 before their first cry had even faded. The town doctor called it God's will. But Sarah wasn't ready to accept that. When she heard about Miss Eliza, the midwife who could coax life from the hands of death, hope flickered again in her heart. Benjamin was skeptical. "That woman's no saint," he'd said. "Folks talk." Sarah took his rough hand and pressed it to her belly. "I don't care what they say, Ben. I need to believe this one will live." And so they went, traveling through 2 days of rain, mud splashing their wagon wheels, to reach the cabin of the woman who could, perhaps, bring them a miracle. Eliza's cabin sat on a slope above the creek, surrounded by lilac bushes and drying herbs that hung from the porch like whispers of the past. When she opened the door, her silver hair shone in the lamplight. Her eyes, gray, steady, sorrowful, studied Sarah's face for a long moment before she smiled gently. "You've lost before," she said softly, as if she already knew. Sarah nodded, tears spilling. "3 times." Eliza placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then this time, we'll fight harder." Inside, the air smelled of mint, chamomile, and smoke. On the table sat glass jars filled with strange roots, powders, and dried petals. The walls were lined with crosses and faded photos of women holding infants. Eliza led Sarah to a small cot and poured her a cup of herbal tea. "Drink. It will keep the pain kind." Then she leaned close and whispered, "But promise me something. When the labor starts, no matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you must not open that door." Sarah frowned. "Why?" Eliza's gaze drifted toward the window, where the wood swayed under the fading sun. "Because some cries aren't meant for human ears." The storm rolled in before midnight. Thunder cracked above the cabin, shaking the roof. Sarah's labor began fast, too fast. Eliza worked like a spirit, her hands moving in a rhythm that seemed older than time. Her calm voice guided Sarah through waves of pain. "Breathe, child. Listen to her heartbeat." Benjamin paced outside the door, helpless and praying under his breath. He could hear Sarah scream, then silence, then a sound that pierced through him. A baby's first cry. He fell to his knees, tears in his eyes. "Thank God, thank you, Lord." But the joy lasted only a breath. The baby's cry faltered, faded, and stopped. Then came Eliza's voice, low and shaking. "I'm so sorry." Benjamin burst into the room, ignoring the warning, but Eliza stood over the still child, her hands trembling. "She was too weak," she whispered. "Her lungs, they couldn't take the air." Outside, thunder roared again, and beneath it, a sound, a second cry. This one came from outside the cabin. Benjamin froze. "Do you hear that?" Eliza's face turned white. Don't open that door. But the cry grew louder, soft, then sharp, like an infant's wail carried by the wind. Sarah clutched her husband's sleeve, eyes wide with fear. "Eliza? What is that?" The midwife didn't answer. She lit another candle and began murmuring under her breath, words neither of them recognized. The flame flickered wildly, the shadows bending like living things. Then, silence. When dawn came, the crying had stopped. Eliza led them to the hill's edge and handed Sarah a small, wrapped bundle. "She must be buried under open sky," Eliza said gently, "so she can see heaven first." Sarah wept as Benjamin dug the grave, the soil damp and cold. Eliza knelt beside them, pressing a wildflower into the earth. When Benjamin looked up, he noticed dozens of tiny mounds scattered through the trees, each with a single wooden cross. Too many to be coincidence. When the Carters returned home, Sarah seemed weaker than before. Her body healed, but her spirit did not. She dreamed of her child every night, of tiny cries echoing through the woods. Neighbors came by with food, but their eyes darted away when she mentioned Eliza's name. One woman whispered, "You're lucky you made it out alive." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" "They say not all babies die from sickness," the woman said quietly. "Some folks say Miss Wren ends them herself." Sarah's face drained of color. But the strangest thing came a week later, when she woke in the night to the sound of a baby crying near their window. Benjamin ran outside with a lantern, but there was nothing. Only the wind and the sound of the creek in the dark. The next morning, they decided, they'd go back. They needed answers. Sheriff Thomas Harper had been in law enforcement for over 20 years. He'd buried his wife 2 winters ago. Childbirth complications. He didn't believe in ghosts or witches. He believed in evidence. When Benjamin came to him with the story, he sighed. People talk too much when grief's fresh. But when he heard about the rows of graves near the midwife's home, his curiosity stirred. That afternoon, he rode to Willow Creek. The air there was unnaturally still. Eliza greeted him on the porch. "You've come about the rumors," she said. He nodded. "I need to ask some questions." Her gray eyes met his. "Ask. But be warned, you may not want the answers." He frowned. "Are you confessing to something, Miss Wren?" Her lips curved faintly. "Not confession, Sheriff. Explanation. There's a difference." Then she said something that would haunt him for weeks. "Not all graves hold the dead. Sometimes a grave is mercy." When Eliza left for the creek to collect herbs, the sheriff entered her cabin. The place was clean, orderly, but filled with unease. The smell of lavender couldn't hide the metallic tang beneath it. In a drawer he found a small leather journal bound with string. Inside were lists of names, dates of births, and symbols beside them. Some names had circles, others small stars, and beside many were the same haunting words: stillborn, released. One page stopped his breath. The sickness returns. Babies born crying with blackened lungs. No doctor understands it. I cannot save them all, but I can spare them pain. The sheriff closed the book slowly. He'd seen death before, but this was something else. Was she killing them out of cruelty? Or out of mercy? He left the cabin with the journal in hand and a question burning in his soul. Later that week, a woman named Margaret Tate arrived in town, riding hard, her eyes swollen from tears. She burst into the sheriff's office. "Where's that midwife? I want her found." "What happened, ma'am?" he asked gently. "She delivered my granddaughter 2 weeks ago." "My daughter died that night. Eliza said the baby didn't make it either." Margaret's voice cracked. "But last night, I heard a baby crying outside my window." The sheriff's heart sank. The same story. The same haunting. He went to see Eliza again, this time with Margaret at his side. The older woman's fury filled the small cabin. "You promised me life," she shouted. "You promised my daughter would live." Eliza took her trembling hands. "She did live," she said softly. "For a moment. Long enough to see the world." Margaret collapsed into sobs. "What kind of mercy is that?" Eliza's eyes glistened. "The kind that ends suffering before it begins." That night, unable to rest, the sheriff gathered 2 deputies and lanterns and returned to the hill behind Eliza's cabin. They dug where the crosses stood. The first grave held the tiny bones of an infant wrapped in linen, with pressed flowers on its chest. The second, the same. But the third grave was empty, and the fourth showed signs of the earth disturbed from inside. The soil had been pushed upward as if something had once moved beneath it. One deputy whispered, "Lord, have mercy." The sheriff stepped back, lantern trembling in his hand. He didn't believe in ghosts, not until he heard it, faint, distant, the sound of a baby crying again from somewhere deep within the trees. He turned toward the sound, and for the first time in his life, Thomas Harper, a man of logic, prayed. The night after the sheriff found the disturbed graves, thunder rolled across the Arkansas hills like a warning. He returned to Eliza's cabin with his lantern dimming in the rain. Eliza was waiting on the porch, soaked to the bone, her hair loose, her face pale but calm. "You've been digging," she said quietly. The sheriff didn't answer. "You've got explaining to do, Miss Wren. What were you burying out there?" Eliza's lips trembled, and then the truth came, soft but heavy. "Do you know what cholera does to a newborn, Sheriff? Or black lung? The mothers come to me starving, dying, and the babies come into this world gasping for air. I hold them, and I can feel their ribs. I can hear their tiny hearts slowing. They don't last." Her voice broke. "So yes, I buried them. But I didn't kill them. I tried to give them peace, not pain." The sheriff slammed his hat down. "You don't have that right. No one does." Tears fell down her weathered cheeks. "Then tell me, who does? The doctors who never come? The fathers who can't afford medicine? Or the God who lets them die screaming?" For a moment, the storm outside seemed to echo her grief, and the sheriff, a man who'd buried his own wife and child, couldn't speak. That night, the townspeople gathered with torches. They wanted justice. By morning, Eliza Wren was in chains. The courthouse was packed tighter than a church on Easter Sunday. Mothers wept in the pews. Fathers clenched their fists. Eliza stood tall, her wrists bound, her gray eyes steady. She looked less like a murderer and more like a woman carrying too much sorrow. The prosecutor spoke harshly. "You buried over 20 infants. You performed births in secret. You deceived these families. How do you plead?" Eliza's answer was calm. "I plead guilty to loving them, to trying to spare them pain when nothing else could." A ripple ran through the room. Some gasped, others bowed their heads. Then, from the back, Benjamin Carter stood up. His voice cracked as he shouted, "And what about my daughter? What did you do with her?" Eliza turned, her lips trembling. "Your daughter lives." The room fell silent. The sheriff's eyes widened. "Explain yourself, Eliza." She nodded slowly. "The night of the storm, when Sarah's baby was born, she wasn't dead, just weak. I could see she wouldn't survive the cold journey home, so I carried her to the old Winfield couple in the hills. They'd lost their own children long ago. I asked them to raise her until she grew strong." Benjamin took a step forward, desperate. "Are you saying she's alive now?" "Yes," Eliza whispered. "She's your grace. Go to the Winfield homestead beyond the river. You'll find her there." The judge leaned forward. "Sheriff Harper, verify this." And so the sheriff, Benjamin, and Sarah set out at dawn. their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and impossible hope. It took hours of riding through thick woods and flooded trails before they reached a small clearing. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and the smell of bread filled the air. An old woman opened the door, Mrs. Winfield. Her eyes softened when she saw the baby in her arms. "You've come for her," she said quietly. "Eliza told us you might." Sarah gasped. The child was rosy-cheeked, her eyes wide and blue. She reached out her tiny hands as if she already knew her mother. "Grace," Sarah whispered. Tears fell freely down her face. "Our baby. Ben. She's alive." Benjamin dropped to his knees, sobbing. "Eliza saved her. Dear Lord, she saved her." The sheriff looked out toward the hills, the truth cutting through him like lightning. Maybe the woman they'd chained wasn't a monster after all. They rode back to town under the red light of sunset. The air was heavy, the sky bleeding gold and gray. When they entered the jailhouse, Eliza was sitting on her cot, humming softly to herself. The sheriff said quietly, "You were right. The Carter's baby lives." Eliza smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Then I can rest easier now." The sheriff took a deep breath. "But you must help me understand. All those other graves?" Her answer was almost a whisper. "They were the children no one claimed. The mothers who died in childbirth, poor, forgotten women. I buried their little ones beside the creek so they wouldn't be alone." The sheriff frowned. "And the empty graves?" Eliza looked toward the window. "Markers, for the ones I couldn't save, so that someone, anyone, would remember they existed." Silence filled the cell. Then she said softly, "Every grave was love, Sheriff, not cruelty." The next morning, the town gathered again. But the air felt different, quieter, uncertain. The preacher stood beside the jailhouse. "Eliza Wren, you are accused of unlawful medical practice, concealment of death, and witchcraft. Do you have anything to say before judgment?" Eliza faced the crowd. Her voice didn't tremble. "I do not regret trying to save them. I only regret that I couldn't save their mothers too. You call me witch, killer, sinner, but I am just a woman who couldn't stand to watch another child die alone." Sarah Carter stepped forward, cradling baby Grace. "She saved my daughter. She risked her name, her life, for this child. If that's a crime, then the law itself needs mercy." For a moment, no one spoke. Some people lowered their heads. Others wiped tears from their eyes. The judge finally said, "Miss Wren, you will not hang. But you will remain here until we decide your fate." Eliza bowed her head. "That's mercy enough." A week passed. Rain came again, soft and cold. Eliza grew weaker. One evening, she called for Sheriff Harper. When he arrived, she handed him a sealed letter tied with twine. "Open this after I'm gone," she said. He frowned. "Don't talk like that." She smiled faintly. "I've seen enough births and deaths to know when one is near." The sheriff left with the letter in his coat pocket. 3 nights later, Eliza Wren's heart stopped beating in her sleep. When the sheriff opened the letter, tears blurred his vision. Inside was not a confession, but knowledge. A list of herbs, remedies, and formulas, treatments for fever, infection, bleeding. At the bottom, she had written, "These are the cures the doctors refused to learn because I was a woman. Share them, so no more mothers die." The sheriff wept openly. The rain poured for hours as they buried her by Willow Creek, among the graves she dug with her own hands. The sheriff himself placed her journal beneath the soil. "You saved more lives than any of them will ever know," he whispered. Sarah and Benjamin came too, holding baby Grace. Sarah placed a small white rose on Eliza's grave. "You gave me my child," she said softly. "I'll never forget you." As the wind swept through the hills, someone swore they saw a faint figure near the trees, a woman in gray, smiling peacefully before fading into mist. No one spoke of it aloud, but every person there felt the same thing: peace. Years passed. The cabin rotted away, but Eliza's name refused to die. Doctors began using her remedies, her birthing mixtures, her herbs. Deaths during childbirth dropped across the county. The sheriff, now an old man, saw her name written in medical journals decades later. The Wren method. They called it revolutionary. None knew it came from a woman once accused of witchcraft. The Carters visited every spring. Grace grew into a bright, curious child. Each year she placed wildflowers at the grave by the creek and whispered, "Thank you, Lady Eliza." In time, people began to call her not the midwife of graves, but the mother of mercy. The Arkansas hills keep their secrets, but some say that on quiet nights, when the moonlight touches the water, you can still hear Eliza's lullaby in the wind, the same tune she used to calm mothers in pain. Travelers stop by the small monument that now stands where her cabin once was. The inscription reads, "She promised new life and gave it, even through death." And those who know her story leave with a heavy heart but a softened soul, reminded of one truth that Eliza herself tried to teach the world. Mercy doesn't always look gentle. Kindness doesn't always look clean. And sometimes, the people the world condemns are the very ones who keep it human. In the end, the midwife who left only graves behind gave the world a chance to live.